All right, let's just dive right into this explainer, shall we? Today, we're synthesizing Peter Thiel's incredibly comprehensive and honestly pretty contrarian philosophy on how to successfully build a startup from day one. We're going to unpack the actual mechanics of creating a truly great company. We'll be looking strictly at the source material to understand exactly why certain startups achieve that astronomical success and become unicorns, while others, well, they just collapse in a mess of infighting before they even launch. Really, it all comes down to getting the earliest moments right. So let's anchor our whole journey here with a concept that's playfully known as Thiel's Law. Basically, it states that a startup messed up at its foundation cannot be fixed. Beginnings are special, right? Just like the founding of the cosmos or the drafting of the US Constitution, those earliest moments set the fundamental rules that dictate an entity's entire future trajectory. As a founder, your absolute first job is to get those initial foundational things right, because you simply cannot patch them later. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. Setting the foundation. 2. Building a startup mafia. 3. The necessity of sales. And 4. Mastering distribution channels. We'll be exploring all these core pillars of a successful business blueprint. Starting with Section 1, setting the foundation. Look, the absolute most crucial decision you'll ever make is who you start your company with. Choosing a co-founder is exactly like getting married. And trust me, founder conflict is just as ugly, emotionally draining, and expensive as a bad divorce. You shouldn't just jump into bed with a random person you met at some weekend networking event. That's just rolling the dice. Kind of like marrying the very first person you sit next to at a Vegas slot machine. Founders need a deep, shared prehistory to survive the immense pressure that's coming their way. Now, to anticipate the inevitable internal conflicts once your team is formed, we need to completely understand the difference between three very critical concepts. It's like a giant puzzle. First, ownership, usually the founders, investors, and employees who legally hold equity. Second, possession, the managers and workers who actively run things day to day. And third, control, the board of directors formally governing its affairs. Distributing these three functions across different groups multiplies the opportunities for massive misalignment. Want to see how this misalignment plays out in the real world? Just look at the DMV. It's a classic example. There, the clerks and bureaucrats have real possession of the daily operations, but their ownership is entirely fictional, and they are completely unaccountable to anyone. It results in a slow, administrative nightmare with zero enthusiasm. Early-stage startups, however, are totally unique. The founders perfectly align both ownership and possession because they personally own the equity and run the daily operations. So the real conflict in a startup usually comes down to ownership versus control. So how do you manage that control without accidentally creating a bureaucratic nightmare of your own? Well, the magic number here is 3. A board of directors of 3 is ideal, maxing out at 5. Why? Because huge boards exercise absolutely zero oversight. They're slow to communicate, impossible to reach consensus with, and honestly, more often than not, they merely provide cover for whatever micro-dictator actually runs the organization. If you want a fast, effective board that holds leadership accountable, you absolutely must keep it incredibly small. Which brings us to another huge foundational rule, borrowed from Ken Kesey. You're either on the bus or you're off the bus. Part-time employees, outside consultants, and even remote workers are fundamentally misaligned with a startup's fragile early goals. Think about it. If they aren't fully in, they will naturally prioritize their own short-term payday over helping you build long-term future value. When things get tough, they just check out. Full-time, in-person involvement is absolutely mandatory for true commitment. Now, here is a fascinating, wildly contrarian anchor. An early-stage, venture-backed CEO should never make more than $150,000 a year. No way. I don't care if they used to make double that at Google. If a CEO collects a massive salary, they risk becoming a comfortable politician. High salaries incentivize leadership to avoid risks that might jeopardize their steady paycheck, keeping them defending the status quo. A cash-poor executive, on the other hand, has to focus on aggressively fixing problems and increasing the value of the company's equity as a whole just to make their time worthwhile. We can actually contrast cash compensation directly with equity here. Cash is attractive, for sure, because it offers immediate optionality, but it inherently encourages short-term thinking. It teaches workers to just grab value as it exists today. Equity, while imperfect and obviously illiquid, is the absolute best way to commit a team to long-term value creation. Anyone who prefers equity reveals a true preference for the long term. But a quick word of warning here, Keep the exact cap table secret. If everyone knows exactly who got what percentage down to the decimal, you risk dropping a nuclear bomb of resentment right in the middle of your office. Let's move on to Section 2, building a startup mafia, cultivating the culture. A successful internal ecosystem requires far more than just assembling a transactional, resume-based workplace where free agents just check in and out. Time is your most valuable asset, right? So why spend it with people you don't even like? Imagine a linear spectrum of company culture. On the far left, you have nihilistic consulting firms, people dropping in and out with zero long-term connection to the mission or each other. On the far right, you have dogmatic cults. The wildly contrarian idea here is that the best startups operate like slightly less extreme cults. Cults are usually fanatically wrong about something. Successful startups, however, are fanatically right about a secret that the outside world has entirely missed. This intense shared belief is exactly why startups end up with uniforms. Those branded hoodies aren't just a symptom of bad tech bro fashion sense. From the outside, everyone should look the same because they represent a tribe of like-minded nerds fiercely devoted to a specific mission. The early PayPal team, the famous PayPal mafia, worked so incredibly well because they were all obsessed with the exact same thing, creating a digital currency controlled by individuals. They were all different, but in the exact same way. But on the inside, every single individual should be sharply distinguished. This leads us to the do one thing management philosophy. Making every person responsible for just one unique task completely eliminates role overlap. Remember, startups are fragile. If you have two highly driven people competing to do the exact same job, they end up fighting each other instead of fighting the competition. It's literally like an autoimmune disease attacking its own body. Doing one thing radically reduces this internal friction and keeps the team facing outward. Section 3, the necessity of sales. It's time to transition from nerds to salesmen. We need to tackle a very dangerous Silicon Valley bias right now. The stubborn belief that a truly great product will just magically sell itself. It will not. Customers aren't going to come just because you built something cool. To really vividly illustrate humanity's deep-seated bias against distribution, let's look at a classic scenario from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Facing planetary destruction, humanity evacuates on 3 ships. The thinkers and leaders go on the A ship, the workers who make things go on the C ship. But the salespeople, middle managers, and telephone sanitizers, they're put on the B ship and sent off first, completely tricked by the others who thought they were utterly useless. The great ironic punchline? The B ship of salespeople is the one that successfully landed on Earth and founded our civilization. We constantly underestimate distribution. The truth is, sales is an orchestrated campaign to change surface appearances. Engineers and nerds often hate this because it feels, fundamentally dishonest compared to transparent, logical engineering. But grandmasters make sales look incredibly easy by hiding it in plain sight. This is exactly why top-tier salespeople rarely have the title salesman. They are account executives or investment bankers or politicians. Nobody wants to be reminded they are actively being sold to, but make no mistake, we live in a world secretly driven by orchestrated sales campaigns. Moving on to Section 4, mastering distribution channels. If you've invented something completely new but haven't simultaneously invented an effective way to sell it, you don't have a bad product, you have a bad business. Let's zoom out to the macro level to figure out exactly how we get our newly built product out into the wider world. When we map the customer acquisition cost, or CAC, which is simply the amount of money spent to get one new paying user, against our target audiences, a glaring problem emerges. Notice that dangerous massive gap right in the middle? The dead zone. This is where a product is priced around, say, $1,000. Personal, door-to-door sales are far too expensive to justify the time, but broad television advertising is far too inefficient and scattered. You have to actively avoid the dead zone. So let's summarize this dense strategy. Your sales approach must perfectly match your price tag. For complex sales, we're talking massive, multi-million-dollar deals like SpaceX rockets, the CEO has to do the selling directly to big government or corporate buyers. For personal sales, dealing with $10,000 to $100,000, companies like Box build dedicated outbound sales teams to target small groups. Lower down, for products around $100, Warby Parker uses marketing and advertising to cast a wide net. And at the lowest cost, companies like PayPal use viral marketing, where the product's core functionality naturally invites new users without spending a dime on ads. But remember, your company needs to sell much more than just its product. You are constantly selling to non-customers. A PR strategy is literally just as necessary as a product distribution strategy. You have to actively sell your company's narrative to the media, because that press is exactly what validates your company to the outside world. It attracts your future top-tier talent and convinces crucial financial backers that you are the winning horse to bet on. Now, here is the absolute power law of distribution 1. Just 1. You do not need the kitchen sink approach. Throwing a few haphazard salespeople, a single magazine ad, and a viral button at a product is a guaranteed recipe for failure. Most businesses fail because they get 0 channels to work. Getting just one single distribution channel to work perfectly, mastering one specific lane, is all it takes to build a phenomenally great, lasting business. Which brings us to our conclusion. Bob Dylan famously said that he who is not busy being born is busy dying. His startup's founding is a highly special, unrepeatable moment. But if you do it right, you can extend that openness to invention indefinitely into the future. It lasts as long as you are actually creating new things. So, ask yourself, if your company is busy being born, what new value are you creating today? Thanks for joining this explainer. Keep building and keep being born.